Thank you. My name is Colin Bell. I'm Director of Africa, Middle East, and South Asian Equities at Auerbach Grayson. Auerbach Grayson is a global broker focused on non-U.S. securities that partners with local banks and brokers to bring their clients local execution in the local stock markets, local research, and local access. We've been in Africa since 1992. And I guess I would approach this question from a more narrow perspective, which is the perspective of public equity markets. And if I did that, I would differentiate somewhat between East Africa and West Africa. And my preference going into 2014 would be quite a big preference for Kenya over Nigeria among the two major economic countries. And my reason would be, number one, we've kind of in the sweet spot now of the political cycle in Kenya, having recently successfully finished the national election, whereas I think in Nigeria next year we will get into the messier part of the political cycle. And the second reason I would point to is there's a clear difference, if we compare Kenya and Nigeria as a whole, between Kenya's priority of growth, which we can see in the lowering of interest rates as inflation falls, which we can see as the president's comments about his intentions over the next 5 years, versus stability in Nigeria, which we can see with single-digit inflation now, yet interest rates have not been brought down. I think it's a clear indication that Mr. Sanusi is much more interested in stability than he is in growth, and he will sacrifice growth for both currency and economic stability. And for those reasons, I think even though the public equity markets, which is 85% of what we do, even though the public equity markets have been more or less correlated with each other across the continent, I think that there's more possibility of divergence in that going forward. And for those reasons, I would very much be focused on Kenya as an investment destination.
Colin, the next question for you. So you're a global broker. You have a vast network of local partners in several African countries. How could stock exchanges in these countries, how could they facilitate more public listings on their domestic market?
Well, I think the answers to the question are actually fairly straightforward, and probably anyone on the panel could answer. But just to give some depth to the answer, to really think about liquidity in the public markets of sub-Saharan Africa, let's just go through some quick numbers. Nigeria is the most liquid market. It trades about $20 to $25 million across the whole stock market per day. Kenya's second, probably 6 to 8 million. And then you have maybe a handful of 7 or 8 other countries that trade about a million or less per day. So we're talking 30, 35 per day for the whole sub-Saharan African continent, ex-South Africa. And so there is absolutely a need to deepen these markets, both in terms of number of listings and as well as liquidity. And I think the answers are pretty obvious. You know, some countries have gone through privatization programs already. Kenya started in 1995 or 6. Countries like that should continue to look for state assets that they can sell off and reorganize and whatnot. Countries who haven't started that program or have been going very slowly should accelerate that. It's the easiest way to get cash in the federal coffers, and it's the easiest way to actually make state companies more efficient. I realize it's not always in the same interest of the governments to do so, but where possible, they should do this. The second answer is a bit more subtle, but still fairly obvious. The regulators in these capital markets should do their best to not only take official steps with legislation and listing requirements, but they should do their best to not micromanage the process. And they should do their best not to push this idea of a wide base of retail, local investors, because what it often does is it drives companies, you know, legit entrepreneurial private companies to the private equity market, because it's much easier to take 2 or 3 large strategic investors, not be public, not go through all the hassles of listing requirements and annual upkeep, as opposed to having 50,000 retail investors, you know, that you don't know and will never find. So I think it's a basic idea, but I think less micromanagement, very clear paths to getting approvals and whatnot is the best way that you can go about that.
Thank you.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.